From sunny St Leonard's on the south coast of the UK, this is the Keto Woman podcast, brought to you by me, Daisy Brackenhall. Hello Keto Lovelies, and welcome to episode number 196. Today I'm joined by my good friend and co-host for Monday Mindset podcast, Terri Lance. You probably know Terri either from Monday Mindset, from her previous episodes on Keto Woman, or maybe you've bumped into her at the fasting method, where she's one of the coaches and leads a behavioural program. Terri has such a gentle and kind way about her that has really helped me personally. But also, I know how much she has helped so many of you and how much you enjoy listening to her. So she was the perfect choice to kick us off with one of the new Mindset Matters episodes. If you haven't already heard me talking about shaking up the format a little bit, this is one of those new types of episodes. It's a little bit shorter in length, which makes it easier for me to edit. But also, I think it's nice to play around with the length and format of the podcast. It makes it a bit more interesting for you. Today we're talking about making keto part of your identity and how much that can help with sticking to it as a way of eating and really making it a lifestyle choice. You'll hear me mention the NHS, and while I do feel truly fortunate to have such a health system, it's certainly not without its faults. And I have come up against a few of those since I've been back here in the UK. I have a short list of things that I miss about France, but the health system, both for me and for the animals, has to be right at the top of the list. I tried to get some testing for my thyroid and also talked briefly to a doctor about the treatment available here. I also discussed the possibility of starting HRT. As soon as I mentioned that one of the angles I was coming at the prospect of taking HRT was for my mood, she immediately tried to put me on antidepressants. Bear in mind that this was just a phone conversation. She's never met me and had spoken to me for just a brief few minutes. I was, I'm afraid, less than impressed, and I declined her offer. I am trialling some HRT treatment and see if it does make any difference. I'll do my own research and I'll do my own testing and figuring out whether it's something that's going to work for me. As far as thyroid goes, unfortunately, it seems that the UK is one of those places where it is woefully underdiagnosed, but then also woefully undertreated. And I guess the two go hand in hand, because I was asking her why I couldn't add free T3 to the blood tests. They were testing for TSH and actually going beyond just testing TSH in my case with testing free T4. However, there was no free T3, so I was phoning up to try and get it added to the list. No, this is something we don't routinely test. I did explain that this wasn't for a diagnosis, that I know I have an underactive thyroid. It was actually diagnosed originally in the UK more than 2 decades ago. That has gone on to be more specifically diagnosed in France as Hashimoto's. And as you may know from comments I've made over various podcasts, that I researched and helped drive my own treatment with my GP for testing free T3 in particular, and then treating with a combination of synthetic T4 and T3, where previously I was just on T4 and really not doing very well. And if you're familiar at all with treating hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's, you may have bumped up against this issue yourself. It's a big problem. And I don't think it's any coincidence that it's predominantly a disorder that affects women. So when I explained that I'd been managing and treating my Hashimoto's for many years in France with routine testing of TSH, free T4 and free T3, as well as occasionally looking at antibodies and even testing reverse T3, and I would then discuss it with my GP if necessary to adjust the medication levels. No, we don't routinely test T3 in the UK, was the answer over and over again. Okay, so what happens with treatment, I said. I've actually been self-medicating basically with NDT, natural desiccated thyroid supplements. because I didn't feel like the synthetic combination was really suiting me that well. However, they are quite expensive. I have to pay for them out of my own pocket. And I've been considering the possibility of going back to a synthetic combination, or at least trying it again. What I discovered, sadly, was that they will not prescribe T3 in the UK. So the only thing available to me and everyone else is T4 only, which is woefully inadequate. I know there are people who take T3 as well, so I can only assume that they have had to go and see somebody privately to obtain that. And even then, I don't think it's particularly easy to get hold of. So I'm going to stick with the NDT because at least I know it works relatively well. It's just going to be a case of finding out what dose works best for me. And as quite often has been the case, I'm just going to have to figure it out myself, it seems. I have found a company online who does a thyroid panel of TSH and free T4 and free T3 for a reasonable price. And apparently they actually use an NHS lab. I did take that test the same time as I had the TSH and free T4 tested at the hospital. And although the results weren't identical, they were close enough to lead me to think that this private company produces fairly accurate results. The testing is done differently. Instead of having blood drawn, you use a finger prick kit and fill a small vial of blood. So I suspect that that has something to do with the slight difference in results. But they were good enough to give me an idea of what my levels are. So I think that's the only thing I can do and basically treat myself. It's not ideal, but it's clear I'm not going to get any help from my GP here in the UK like I did in France. Anyway, that's enough of me ranting on about the inadequacies of the NHS. I do appreciate that they have been and still are very overstretched. But I think when it comes to treatment of thyroid issues, this is a long-standing problem and it has nothing to do with the current COVID crisis. At some point, I think I'll record a video or write an article or put the information together anyway of the various resources I've found that have helped me that maybe you might find useful too. But this is supposed to be a shorter format. I'm not supposed to be rambling on. So let's jump in to Terri and I's chat right now. I really hope you enjoy listening to it as much as I enjoyed recording. Welcome back, Terri, to the Keto Woman podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks, Daisy. Good to be here.
Well, this is the first of one of the new format episodes. As you know, I've wanted to shake Keto Woman up a little bit, and I thought it would be really nice to have some shorter form episodes. And one of the types of episodes I really wanted to bring to the audience was mindset and behavior. And of course, the first person who came to mind was my good friend and co-host on the Monday Mindset podcast, Terri Lance. So thank you very much for joining me, Terri.
I'm excited to do this. I'm very happy to get to join you in another format here.
So the choice is yours about what you would like to talk about. So take it away.
Great, thanks. So one of the thoughts I've been thinking about since you first mentioned this to me is the idea that you and I talk a lot about mindset and behavioral things in Monday Mindset podcast. But oftentimes we skirt around the issue of dietary approaches, fasting, and things that are, part of how we got connected with ketogenic lifestyle. And then for me, fasting and all of that. So I was really excited for this opportunity to get to talk in a little more detail about some of these concepts as they relate to dietary lifestyle and, mindset and behavior things.
That's right, because we agreed, didn't we, when we started Monday Mindset, that we were mostly, like you say, occasionally we sort of skirt around it a bit, but we agreed mostly we were going to keep all that stuff out of it.
Mm-hmm. So I was thinking about what do I hear and see most often in different Facebook groups that I'm in your Kick Our Keto Bitches group, in other keto groups, low carb different fasting groups, and then in my work with clients through the fasting method, what kind of issues come up around mindset and behavior. And one of the biggest themes that I think most of us, I could talk about this every time you and I talk, but people might get a little tired of me. But I think one of the most important things to think about if you are doing, and I usually use the term low carb and keto pretty interchangeably, but just if you're choosing to approach your nutrition through a ketogenic way of eating or a low carb way of eating, whatever that looks like, I think it's really important to really have a grasp on why you're doing it. Is it because you think it's the healthiest way to eat? Is it because you have some health concerns that really require anti-inflammatory foods and not a lot of insulin response, not a lot of glucose? Are you seeking weight loss or weight management that this really makes sense for? And once you really have that identified, to then start making the behavior change, the habits that you're doing related to all of this, part of your identity. And you and I talked a little bit about this on one of our Monday Mindset podcast episodes, but one of the authors I really enjoy is James Clear, who wrote the book Atomic Habits. And in a podcast interview that we both listened to, he talked about this, that if you really want to be successful at habit change, it is best to choose habits that support your identity, how you see yourself, or even how you want to see yourself, how you want to live your life and create your life. I'm guessing you and I have talked about this, so I'm not guessing. I know that you see this too, where people say things like, I do so great when I'm eating keto, and then I don't. Or they'll say things like, I've been keto for 14 days and I'm doing so well. But this was after 2 months of not. And it always just strikes a chord in me that this is part of the challenge that people really, I think, need to address. If I'm going to say, I think keto or low carb or fasting are great strategies, are they strategies I only need to use 10% of the time? Or are they strategies that I have to make my lifestyle and therefore make my identity?
Yes, and this is really what people are going on about when they say, and it can sound a bit preachy, I think, when you're new to keto, new to low carb, new to actually whatever new dietary plan you're following. As long as it's, it's not actually set up as a crash diet or some kind of fad diet. But anything, like keto, like low carb, like vegan, vegetarian, all sorts of things that are very much a lifestyle change. And you hear that all the time, don't you? What's the trick to making it stick? Making it your lifestyle, choosing it as your lifestyle. It's not a diet. And it can sound a bit preachy, but this is what it's all about, isn't it? Mm-hmm. If it's that important to you, and we've had this discussion, haven't we, that I think we can learn a great deal actually from the vegan community. Mm-hmm. Vegans get a bad rap often in the keto community. I don't think they should actually, but it's a choice. That's who you are, and everything just falls into place because of that. And I think we can learn a lot from that. Like you were saying, you wouldn't generally anyway, you wouldn't see a diehard vegan saying, oh, I'm just going to take the weekend off and go and have, steak and bacon and all the rest of it. We all know someone like that and they just wouldn't do it. Mm-hmm. So we need to adopt that, I think. We Absolutely. Need to start being like that. It's not... And it is that switch in mindset, not thinking about it as a diet. This is part of me. This is how I want to live. So it's not a case of taking the weekend off, taking time off when you go on holiday. Yes, you might make different decisions and different choices to fit what you're doing in the moment, but it should just come naturally when it's part of your identity.
And as you were describing that, I was also thinking being part of your identity means it fits your values. So I think for some people, when I use the example of, I never hear a vegan person who's very committed to being vegan. I never hear them say, well, my whole family's eating steak, so I'm just going to have steak tonight. because that doesn't fit their value system. That decision for many to be vegan is a value system either around what they believe is best for their health, what they believe is best for the environment, or ethical decision based on using animals for food, whatever. That decision is a values-based decision. And I think that's where some of us struggle some with more ketogenic or low carb lifestyles is I think some people take it as it's kind of a restriction I have to put on myself versus a value. I value eating whole food that doesn't cause as much insulin response from my body. So is this cake congruent with my values? No, it's not. So it's in that way, it's the same as someone who is vegan would not say, I really miss bacon, so I'm just going to have bacon today. It's incongruent with their values and their identity and why they're doing what they're doing. And I know for some people, again, that analogy doesn't fit because many people who choose to eat vegetarian or vegan, is based on like a ethical, moral thing. And most people are not ethically or morally choosing low carb or keto. But maybe just to broaden it out a little bit, it's a value system. I value this approach to nutrition as being what's best for my liver, pancreas, brain, weight, and then be congruent with those values. For me, it makes decisions so much easier. And when I watch people kind of waffling, I hear how difficult that is. So let's say they go out to dinner with friends, and the decision then is today a day that I eat low carb, or do I do a keto meal, or, maybe I should just have this pasta dish. And for me, it actually has made that so much easier. When I go to a restaurant, I know what part of the menu I will look at, and I know what part of the menu I won't. I know what adaptations I will ask for. So I spent the day yesterday in a new town where I wasn't familiar with anything and found 2 places to eat meals that I could very easily make work for my approach to eating. I looked for vegetables. I looked for simple meats. I looked for healthy fats. And as I shared with you before we started recording, I even found ice cream that fits my approach. So knowing that I'm going to be congruent with my approach made finding those things so much easier.
Yes, because I was thinking about that slight mismatch with how you change that value system. Because, yes, it's not always the case for people who follow a vegan lifestyle, but it generally is. It generally encompasses, and it is very much filtered into the mainstream. I mean, I've noticed, not so much in France, but it was creeping in there. But I've certainly noticed very much being back in the UK that plant-based everything is dominating. And there's just that general conception of the morality behind it. You're helping save the planet. You're not eating animals, all these things like that. So like you said, it's quite a clear value system. But yes, that's exactly what I was going to ask you. How can you apply that? But it's just thinking about the values, your own values. What's your identity, and what are the values that support that? What works? And figuring out your own system. And like you say, once you're clear about that, it does make it a lot easier. When you're with your family. So, for example, I'm going to see some of my family. My brother's family is coming down to my mum's next weekend, and I'm going over there. Chances are quite good that we might get a takeaway maybe for a meal in the evening. And they might ask for suggestions. Well, there are some things that I know that just aren't really going to work, that I can't really make work. So if someone suggests pizza, for example, well, that's not going to be great for me. Can we have something else? Or maybe I can get something else. As we were talking about, an Indian takeaway usually fits. You can find something quite easily. Chinese takeaway, a little bit more difficult. So you get to know the kind of, especially with fast foods or when you're going somewhere different, you kind of know what you're looking for. So it's just a bit easier, isn't it, to find something?
And I think the more you can be in tune with your why, what are your values around this choice, those decisions become easier. So for example, you mentioned maybe for someone vegetarian or vegan, an idea that they feel like, or plant-based being, I'm saving the planet, I'm cutting down on carbon footprint or whatever. Well, I can say that about myself eating low carb. I'm cutting down on the medical care system expenses. I'm not going on as many medications and having to have, as frequent of regular doctor visits or, whatever that might be, or people with cardiovascular health issues. And so to really just be in touch with what is important to you. If feeling like you're contributing to the well-being of other people, you're using fewer of the medical care system resources, that's a great way to contribute. And if you believe eating low carb or keto helps you to do that, then it's in my mind, it's much easier then to be congruent with that decision. It's not just, I want to fit into that bathing suit. Whereas for some people, that is a driving force. But for many of us, I think we need some other values or reasons why. Otherwise, those things fade very quickly when you're faced with that decision at that restaurant. And you brought up another really important point that to me, if you're congruent with what works for you and what you value, what other people are doing doesn't really matter. So let's say you and a friend were going to get together and they said, I really want to order out from my favorite Chinese restaurant. Let's do that. And you said, that's great. You go ahead and do that. I'm going to order from this steakhouse. You're both getting takeaway food anyway. What difference does it make? But they're doing what's congruent for their values and their preferences, and you're doing what's congruent for yours. And I think oftentimes, and you and I could do a whole nother talk on this, but oftentimes we feel like we need to just go along with what other people are doing. Like definitely. Play nice, don't make anyone else uncomfortable. Your health and your being congruent with yourself, that's your right. And if someone else is uncomfortable with that, as long as you're not harming them, that's for them to work on. If they say, oh, well, I wanted us to get food from the same place, that's their stuff. But what you just did in that example was you were to say to them, great, enjoy that Chinese food that you really love. I'm going to enjoy this steak meal that I really love.
And we can enjoy the meal together.
Exactly. And so everyone can stay congruent with their beliefs and their values. It doesn't have to be a one giving up of.
And it's so easy to do these days in most places anyway. I thought that was very important what you just said about thinking about the healthcare system, for example. I mean, save the NHS is a huge slogan, especially with COVID in the UK. For every Brit, really, the NHS has a place in their heart. It's free healthcare. It's very important to us. And it's been put under a lot of pressure with COVID. So one of the slogans has been, help the NHS, save the NHS. And I think often something that does have restrictions. So a vegan way of eating is very restrictive. A keto way of eating is pretty restrictive. But it helps, doesn't it? If you know that you're doing something for the greater good. So yes, you think of your own value system and the things that are important to you and your identity, but to have that extra layer for the good of something bigger than yourself, that charitable aspect, that thinking of others aspect, if that comes wrapped up in your identity. So if you're thinking, part of the reason I'm eating this way is because I want to take the pressure off the NHS. That's very important to me. I think that really helps to have these layers, layer upon layer upon layer, different things that you can fall back on when you're struggling a bit. Because make no mistake, I used to go out with a vegetarian, not vegan, but he was very strict. He was very committed, had that strong value system, part of his identity. He missed bacon. That was the thing, he found really difficult. So he did feel that restriction. It was very hard for him to do, but he did it with all these layers of why he was doing it.
I think for some of us, and I know I'm maybe making a light example of this, but if we make it just about, there are reasons I think this could be good for me, like I'm going to stop wearing blue. And you asked me, well, why? And I said, well, I don't always get compliments when I wear blue. I just think it would be better for me not to. That's pretty wishy-washy, and pretty easily I'm going to grab my favorite blue shirt and wear it. And when I'm struggling a little bit, I'm going to wear more blue or whatever. So if we're saying, I think eating low carb is just good for me because I've watched a lot of things that say it would be, it's going to be harder for me to really make those habit changes. It's going to be so much easier for me to still fill my cart with the old things that I used to fill my shopping cart with. It's going to be so much easier for me when a friend says, hey, would you like to have some cake? That I say, sure. Versus if I'm making that choice based on actual values and identity, then eating that stuff, having that stuff in my house, it just doesn't fit. Now, if I had an allergy to blue dye in clothes, I would not wear blue clothes because there's a significant conflict with having it. And I know that sounds a little weird, but I think for some of us, we don't make those foods that we now deem as problematic for us. We don't see them as problematic enough that we won't have them.
No, there's something that we're restricting ourselves from, we're holding ourselves back from.
Yeah.
It's, rather than they're something that's toxic for us. If we could think of them more as being toxic, they just don't fit.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you and I will talk about this in future episodes too, but even in that example, I might say, they're not restricting me. There's a choice to not have this. What it's actually restricting me or depriving me from is higher blood sugar. What it's depriving me from having is fatty liver. So having cake today, 10 seconds of deprivation of not enjoying, a minute's worth of cake is depriving me of ill health, depriving me of contributing to the healthcare issues, all of those things. And I think there's just so many ways that we just can work on shifting the way we think about it and the way we talk to ourselves about it to make it a natural lifestyle so that it becomes something you almost don't have to choose because it's so much ingrained in how you live.
And like you say, it does just make life easier, actually. And we're not saying that this is necessarily something that's easy to do. We both think it's something that's important to do. We think it's something that is going to make your life a lot easier if you are committed to a ketogenic or a low carb way of eating. We firmly believe this is going to make it easier for you to do that. But we're not saying that it's necessarily easy to get that mindset, to get that ingrained. It's certainly something that I've had to work on a lot. I've been keto for about 5 years now or something, and it's still something I struggle with. It's still something I'm working on, but I am working on it, and it does become clearer and clearer and more obvious to me as I continue. So, with that in mind, and I like to end with a top tip. It's me giving you a little bit of a warning. What is your top tip to a good place to start to develop this mindset, to change your identity when it comes to eating keto low carb?
That is a great question. I think the most important thing is kind of where we started, is to go back to, why am I actually doing this? Why am I in this keto group? Why am I following this Facebook group that promotes low carb eating? Why do I value this? And are there things in it that are important enough to me that I can work on not straddling the fence? It's not like a strategy I can do sometimes while I'm still holding on to my other habits, because they cancel each other out. Going back to my old way of eating mitigates the benefit of eating this way. But I have to be really clear about what are my perceived and actual benefits from this change. Otherwise, there's no point in making the change, and it will be very hard to commit to it. So I think really reflecting on, I am making this choice for what reasons? What drives me to this? To get in touch with the values and the identity so that you have this kind of centered thing to hold on to.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Terri, for this first of our mindset episodes. I think people are going to find them very helpful. And I encourage you, if you're listening to this and are thinking, oh, I'd really like you to talk about this or that, get in touch, let me know, and maybe we can do a future episode to help you with the issue that you have. Thank you once again, Terri. This has been every bit as enjoyable as I knew it was going to be.
Fantastic. I look forward to talking again soon.
Thank you for listening all the way to the end. I really hope you enjoyed this new format. I'm pretty sure that you will have enjoyed listening to Terri, and maybe there's something you'd like us to talk about in the future. Do get in touch with me. I'm always open to suggestions and I love hearing your ideas. You can reach out on social media or you can email me at daisy@ketowomanpodcast.com. The sun is still shining here today, although apparently the rain clouds are rolling in tonight. Today is the second time I have double dipped in the sea. It's another moonlight swim. Apparently it's a buck moon tonight. Hopefully we're going to get to see it. Last time, although it was lovely weather, it was cloudy, so there was no moon visible. At the moment, it's still clear blue skies, so I'm hoping the clouds don't come in by the time we go this evening, round about 9 o'clock, just as it's starting to get dark. Wherever you are, I hope you're heading into a very fabulous weekend that makes you happy and refreshes you, ready to start your week on Monday. For now, I'm going to leave you with an end quote from James Clear. You might be familiar with his book, Atomic Habits. We mention him in this podcast, and he's one of Terri's favourite authors, so he seemed the perfect person to use for this week's end quote. The ultimate form of intrinsic motivation is when a habit becomes part of your identity. It's one thing to say, I'm the type of person who wants this. It's something very different to say, I'm the type of person who is this. Until next time, take very good care. Bye-bye, Keto Lovelies.